Hello, everyone. Let me make sure I can hear myself. Gonna give it a few more minutes. Can you guys hear me? Everything sound good? Looks like my levels are good. Hey Mazda, thanks for the compliment on the latest video. We're gonna be editing a photo from that video, so. Mike, I'm doing all right. Pretty good day. Getting prepared for this blizzard, apparently. Thanks, Pedro. Hey, Ihor. How's it going? Is the music good? I pretty much have it the same volume I normally do, so it should be fine. Just gonna give it probably one more minute and we'll start. Only really gonna edit one photo today. I don't think it's gonna be too difficult. I already have a general idea of what I want to do, so. Hey, Simon. Hey, Patel, I'm doing all right. Hey, Joey, welcome. Thanks for the sub. I don't think, for some reason, YouTube subs don't come through on the live stream correctly. So, but welcome. We are going to be editing the photo that was the thumbnail for the live stream. Yes, Andrew, a slight haircut. Yeah, Mike, I've seen a few. There's a lot of photo gloves, by the way. I feel like I see a different company of gloves quite often. Far more than you would assume is out there. But all right, I will at least transition to the editing scene, and you guys can see the photo we're going to edit. I've already done the edit here. By that I mean I've already done like the edit in Lightroom, but there's a lot more here that I want to do. So this was, if you watch my video from Monday, this video or this photo was in the video, but there is just a lack of detail that I want to bring out, basically in the bright areas and just kind of balance a little more. Apparently it's going to take a while to load. Hey, thanks, John. Can we edit 2021 on Lightroom and add some colors? Not exactly what you mean. Don't know what you mean by that, but we're going to edit this photo. So this is a bracketed exposure, and I believe, here, I'll show you what this looks like before my Lightroom edit. I have the shadows pulled like really far up here. And basically what I want to do is clean up the image a bit by blending it by using my brighter layer instead of just using the one exposure. Even though this looks, now let me just go back. Even though this looks pretty good overall, I think there's more potential here because I think this photo will probably go in my portfolio. And that means that I want to use as much possible detail as I can, especially for areas down here in the trees, so that we can prevent a little bit of muddiness in those shadows. And we're going to bring out some of the details using this brighter exposure, although I might bring it down some because it's a little too bright. And even though the trees are obviously a little hazy here. There's definitely more detail down here. And it's just, I think a lot of the times if I edit a photo like this and get it to this point, if it's good enough to either put in a video or put on Instagram or something like that, I will. But if it's something that I think is good enough for my portfolio, I might use as much possible resources as I can to make it basically as perfect as I can get it, in case someone wants to buy it as a print, something like that. I actually think overall I could probably get away with just this exposure, but like I said, I think we can make it better. So that was my plan for today. And this single shot is part of this panorama that I might talk about this in a later video, but there is one error that I do way too often that I keep. Literally, the last time I did it was in for my fall series stuff, and it is when I'm taking panos with my zoom lens, I don't give enough time between the shots. So I take the shot, I move the camera, I lock down my tripod, 2-second timer, and every time I've done that, some of my photos get scuffed because there's still slight movement and I haven't given enough time between the shots. And for some reason, I'm in such a hurry to make sure that I take them one right after the other to match up stuff, that it messes up the shot. So in this pano, the left shot is good. The middle shot is good, which is the one we're going to be working on. But the right shot is just ever so slightly blurry. And I kicked myself because it's fine this zoomed out, but it's an image I don't know if I could add to my portfolio just because of that. But I like this particular pano a lot. And today we're just going to be working on basically the middle part of the photo and hopefully getting it to a point where it's just a tiny bit cleaner. So hope you guys are doing well. I think the way we're going to start out is I'm going to reset this image, make sure that it's lined up with the other 3 images that I selected, which it is, and basically do our preliminary edits in Lightroom and then take it into Photoshop and go from there. So I'm not going to do a whole lot here. I'm going to turn on landscape, which is definitely going to make the image a little bit more blue. I don't actually think we're going to use the dark layer. I think we have, like, this is plenty dark enough, but we are going to use the bright layer. However, I'm going to bring down the exposure a little bit. Maybe I don't want to bring down the exposure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a trick here where I'm going to crop out the sky really quick so that I get rid of all the stuff that's white so that I can use my histogram a little bit more accurately. So what that's going to do is when I had everything cropped out like this and I was bringing down the exposure, you can see the majority of my histogram is all the way over here on the right, and I'm recovering. By the way, this is the Canon R5. That highlight recovery is actually insane. I don't think my 5D Mark IV has that much highlight recovery. Okay, well, that's good to know. I don't think there's any loss of detail there. Okay, well, that's pretty impressive. I don't think my 5D Mark IV has that much recovery for the highlights. Okay, sorry, sidetracked. So anyways, what I was going to do is, so that I get a better idea for my histogram, if I'm going to use that to get the values where I want them, I'm just going to crop out the sky so that I don't have any of that data, and I get a better idea of the parts that I'm pretty much going to be using this brighter exposure for, which is the mountain here and the trees. So I'm going to bring this down now, and I'm paying attention to this because obviously we're going to be using this brighter exposure to bring out the detail in the trees. So I'm just balancing it just ever so slightly, and I think this is looking pretty good. And then I'm going to take my crop back up, and then I think I'm going to bring this down just a little bit. Again, we're only using this exposure for the mountain and the foreground. Hey Kedar, how's it going? Something else I noticed about this particular image is obviously the snow looks like this white balance is probably close to correct in the sense that because all of this was in shadow, it appears more blue. and the background is obviously pink. But I know that when I first did my preliminary edit, I liked the image more when I warmed it up, leaving some blue in the snow, but not completely just super blue. But we'll have to see, because I obviously like the tonal range that's in the sky here, and I think that's super important for this particular image. If you guys are just joining, welcome. I try to do a stream once a week. It might become bi-monthly though. I'm not entirely sure. Really depends in terms of time and how much time I have. If you guys want to donate, there's a link in the description below. It just helps me out. And feel free to chat, ask questions, anything like that. I don't think this photo will take the full 2 hours, so we'll have some extra time. I usually try to stream for 2 hours. But most of the people that are chatting, I've recognized the names. Some of you guys are new, so welcome. Thank you. Okay. Back to this. Okay, let's get this particular edit. So out of this one, I think the sky is the most important, and I can bring out some of the shadows a little bit. And the reason I'm going to bring up the shadows before I take this into Photoshop is just to give me a little bit easier time blending between this layer and the bright layer here. Because again, I still think this might be too bright. I think actually what I'm going to do, even though it's a little unconventional here, is I think I'm actually going to darken the top part of the image a little bit, trying to keep the detail in the trees just to make my blend a little bit easier on myself. I think something like this is probably pretty good. Let's bring it back up just a little bit. That looks good. Justin, it's not going anywhere, promise. Okay. So this is still looking kind of blue. I'm definitely going to warm it up a little bit. So one thing that I will likely do is warm up the center part of the image ever so slightly at the end. So I want to leave room for that. So I don't want to make this too warm. I think something around here is probably good. And again, I'm leaving some blue in the snow on purpose, but I'm not making it look completely blue. And you can see here was the original white balance. This is probably closer to accurate in real life, but I don't want my snow to look that blue. Let's bring it back down. Let's make it a little bit cooler. Yeah. Okay, so remember, we're just doing a preliminary edit before we take this into Photoshop. So I'm not really adding a whole lot to the image. I'm actually going to remove sharpening and increase the detail. And that is just going to allow me to add sharpening back in once I bring it back from Photoshop. Turn on my lens corrections. I actually think this stuff is automatic on the R5 now, but maybe I don't have the setting correct. I'm not sure. Something I'll have to deal with later. So this is looking pretty good. Let's maybe... No, I think this is looking pretty good. And I'm going to copy this particular white balance over to the other image. I could copy and paste it, but because it's just one quick change, I'm just going to do it manually. We need to switch this to Adobe Landscape so it matches the other one. That brought out some local contrast. And you can see some coloration here in the mountains, or in that peak side. I definitely want to make sure that gets seen in our final image. And I think overall this is looking pretty good. I still can't believe I can recover. I can't believe I can recover that much detail on the highlight side. That's just absolutely bonkers. Okay. And again, if you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to ask. So what I should have done, I'm actually just going to do it now, is I am going to just check all here and then uncheck basic stuff. Copy that over. I think I already did that. Whoops. And then paste it. That'll copy my sharpening and the lens correction stuff. I should have just done that when I did the white balance thing, but I didn't think about it. And then we're going to have to re-add this back in. And I think it was about here. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I talk about the layers, different layers, as if they were layers. Is there a reason why you don't use the radial filter you talk about in previous videos? Do you mean why am I not using radial filters to edit the photo rather than taking it to Photoshop, Joey? Okay. I think this is pretty close. So I'm going to actually warm up the brighter image a tad. So that means when I blend in the brighter parts in the image, they will be slightly warmer, which should give us the effect that I'm looking for. So now that I have the preliminary edits done on both of those, I'm just going to select both of them by holding Control, open as layers in Photoshop. Different photos instead of different range masks. Joey, I'm sorry, I'm still a little confused on what you're asking. Thanks, Patrick. All right, those are loading in. And I got to get Photoshop situated for the stream. I think that's pretty close. Good enough. All right. So the first thing we're going to do, like I said, I don't think this photo is going to take too long because I pretty much know exactly what I want. I want to bring out the shadow detail here to give me a little bit more detail in the image if I were to print it, because a lot of times these shadows need to be brought up before print so that even though I want them dark, I want someone to be able to see that they're trees. There's a slight shift. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is align these, and hopefully that solves that. If not, then, well, that's going to be a problem. All right, see if that fixed it. There's still a shift. Let's go up here and see. Huh. Maybe it's just the brightness shift. It's not the end of the world. I am zoomed in pretty far. Man, is this image blurry? I think this image might be a little blurry. Ugh, it is. Okay, hold on. I thought I checked that. Let's see. Do I have another? Maybe this one will work. Nope, that one's also blurry. These are close to 1 second exposures. That's weird. This one looks fine here. Maybe it's not. I'm just seeing things. Sorry, guys. I just need to make sure that we blend this with the correct image. I think it's sharp. There might be a tad bit. I think it's just the brightness. Okay. I know this is like super minute detail, but that's kind of the whole point of this edit, is to get the image looking as best as possible. And I don't want to use a blurry layer, even though it's really slight, I think. I'm not sure if my focus shift between the two shots. I'm trying to check ridge lines. That's usually where the easiest place to tell how blurry something could be based off of just slight camera movement when you were taking the photo, that kind of thing. And I'm just checking between the two exposures we're using, so bear with me. Okay. Let's see, do I have another photo that's bright, that's not blurry? No, that one's definitely blurry. And again, this came from, it could have been two things. Could have been me being impatient, taking the photos, although by the last exposure, hopefully the camera was stable. Also could have been I didn't have the right IS setting on, which could have also botched the exposure. There's also this weird effect where when a photo is over like too bright, it's hard to see if, I guess, the shadow detail in the shot, if it's blurry or not. I guess what I could do is just bring this down by 2 stops and then compare it to the shot we're using, the main shot we're using. And I just want to make sure that these will blend together correctly. Let's take a look here. Nope, it's blurry. Okay. Well, that's a problem. Huh. Yeah, it's weird because I've made this mistake in the past, and I told myself to just slow down. And I think I was just so excited about getting conditions like this that I literally hadn't gotten, I haven't gotten sunset or sunrise conditions like this in a long time, where I was actually able to shoot something. So probably my excitement got the best of me. And I mean, mistakes like this always happen no matter what level you're at. I promise. But it does suck that I thought I had an exposure. The thing is, I could use pretty much any of these brighter exposures if I can get it to blend, to line up correctly. I just need it to be sharp enough, because really all I want is the trees. That's really all I care about in this particular shot. So if I can find one really quick, I don't care about the sky. Okay, this one is, let's check out the trees. Okay, this one actually looks pretty sharp. Oh, we're literally looking at like a pixel level at this point, but let me compare it to the one we were just looking at and reset this to whatever the exposure was before. Yeah, okay. Maybe we try to use this one. Oh boy, where did it go? Nope, not that one. Here we go. Is this it? It does not seem like it. So something else I could do is just look for a slightly brighter exposure and just bring up the exposure on it. And the reason that would, or slightly bright exposure, slightly darker exposure, and that would mean that my shutter speed was a little bit less, meaning the photo should be a little sharper. Yeah, I have stabilization, but the problem is if you don't change your stabilization settings when it's on a tripod, every once in a while it can actually be a problem. Okay, this one looks pretty sharp. Let's see comparison here. And then hopefully I can align them. Really, I just want to get the details out of the trees, if anything. So, sorry again, bear with me. Live editing. I don't think it's that one. Is it this one? Okay, now let's see if these line up enough. Yeah, we can probably line those up, I think. All right. Let's see. I'm going to copy those settings to this one. And let's check that sharpness in the trees one more time. see the difference here. Yeah, this one's definitely sharp. Okay. Now let's take this photo. I'm going to close out of this photo in Photoshop. And we're going to open that one and this one in Photoshop and see what we can do. Let me check up on chat. Joey, that's what I did with my preliminary edit. I'm not sure when you joined the stream, but the whole point for this stream for me was to hopefully get this photo to portfolio quality in terms of using multiple exposures so that I can get some of the detail out of the trees. But as you just saw live, I'm not sure if the brighter exposure is going to end up working very well. So let me align these and see if the alignment works. If it doesn't, then maybe we just use the same exposure to blend both together and go from there. So I'm just trying to get as much detail out of the photo as possible. Joey, I shot 3, you can see down here in Lightroom, when I'm shooting bracketed shots, all that means is that I'm taking an underexposed photo, a correctly exposed photo, and an overexposed photo, just so that I can hopefully recover some of the detail if my camera doesn't see all of it. Now, this was the edit that I did only in Lightroom, and it was close. But you can tell I pretty much brought the shadows all the way up and the highlights all the way down. And I just want more adjustability to hopefully bring out more detail in the photo. That's what we're doing. Oh, thanks, Alex. Thanks for the support, man. Awesome to hear. Okay. Let's see how these lined up. Looks like they lined up pretty well. I will say the brighter exposure is still not where I want it to be. Let's check up here. I think this is as close as it's going to get. So let's see. I'm trying to think of what exactly I want to do. Do I want to use this brighter exposure even though the light was different up here? Or do I want to just use one single exposure in Photoshop? You know, I think we're going to get a better result if we just use a single exposure. So, because of my mistake in the field, I'm going to go back to just using the single exposure like I did here, but we're going to create a virtual copy and then pretend like it's 2 different exposures. Sometimes it happens. Definitely one of those things where I think next time I've made the mistake enough where I will absolutely make sure. I'll probably switch to using a 10-second timer or a shutter release, or just make sure that I just take a few extra seconds between exposures when I'm panning back and forth. The other thing is, I wasn't even, like, this shot is sharp. This correctly exposed shot is sharp. But my 1 second exposure, I guess at 200 mil or 160, is not sharp. And that means that I either didn't have my tripod secure enough, or because I use a pretty light travel tripod, I'm definitely noticing. I actually think it was probably just not having the stabilization setting correctly, honestly. And I think that's what ruined this, is because I just didn't turn it to basically pan mode. I had it on the first setting, and that's probably what caused this. But I can't do anything about it now, so the best thing to do is just continue on and do what we can with what we got. So I'm going to create a virtual copy here, And we're basically going to bring up the detail in all the shadow areas and stuff like that by just bringing the exposure up. I actually think probably on this Canon R5 that there's plenty of data here to make it clean enough. It looks like there is. And I think this is probably pretty good overall. I do want to warm up the brighter exposure a little bit. We'll blend that together. And then, yeah, this should give us a much sharper image, even though the detail in the trees might not be fantastic. Let me check chat because there's a lot of text going. Joey, I love how you said to keep steady shots like this as I'm explaining, as I'm showing you all the shots that were not stable. No, all you do is here. 1 second. Let me see if I can show you live. So, really quick. Let's see if you can see the screen. If it'll focus, or if it's just going to focus on my eyes. It's just going to focus on my eyes. Sometimes technology is too good. Well, maybe you can see it here. Basically, when you're in your photo mode on my Canon, this is how it works. You just bring up the Q menu. And this setting right here that has your, let's see if I can get it to focus on this particular part. Come on. There we go. This thing that's highlighted, obviously it says no card in camera. When you highlight it, you can click on it. And then once you click on it, come on. It'll bring up this menu. Oh my God, it's just going to keep telling me no card in camera. It's just going to bring up this menu. And you can adjust this with the top dial. And again, it's going to be different on whatever camera you have. And then this top dial will basically have these little markers on it. And the markers, let's see. That'll show you how many bracketed exposures you're going to take. And all I do is shoot -2, 0, and +2. Maybe I'll do a video on it. This is really helpful for cameras that don't have as wide a dynamic range as something like a brand new camera. But it's something that people have been doing for like, it's how you take HDR images. I'm just not using HDR. I hope that explains it, Joey. So basically, you can also do it manually. So I could technically take a shot that's -2 EV, move the shutter, take 0, move the shutter, and then take the +2. But when you set the bracket like that, it makes it way easier. It'll just take all three right in a row. So, and that's basically what I did down here. You can see in Lightroom, I have this is the 0 EV, this is the -2, and this is the +2. And all that's going to do is just give me more ability to edit later in case there was a huge range of data. And the reason I was doing this is because I didn't really know how much recovery the R5 had at the time. And sometimes I do it just in case. Like I said, ideally, I would love to take a bright exposure and blend in these trees. Sorry, I didn't have the right screen up when I showed you. But this is like 0 EV, -2 EV, +2 EV, and the camera takes all those right after one another. And like I said, ideally, because I'm trying to put this in my portfolio, I want as much detail in these shadow areas as possible. So I would love to use a bright exposure so that even though this looks a little hazy and stuff, there's a lot of detail here of all the trees. I would love to have that in my photo so that if I were to print it or sell it as a print, those details show up. But because of the issues that I was talking about with stabilization, either my tripod or I just didn't wait long enough for my camera to settle. I was also in some mud that probably could have caused enough of a difference. I will admit that I use pretty light tripods, and it is something that I am aware of when I'm shooting telephoto, is that I am not using the most stable tripods, which typically doesn't matter except when I make mistakes, and then it matters. So yeah, I think I will probably do a tutorial. Hey Debbie, how's it going? All right, let's get back to the edit. And again, we're just going to use the same exposure, and I'm just going to blend them together in Photoshop as if it's 2 exposures. Hope everyone's doing well. If you guys want to support the channel, there is a link in the description. Helps me out a lot. I appreciate all the support that I've already received and all the nice comments that you guys leave. All right. Now these are loaded in. All I'm going to do is luminosity mask the shadow areas really quick. Like I said, I don't actually think this edit is going to take that long, except for I'd probably be done with it by now if it wasn't for what just happened. So let's find the correct mask. Yeah, that looks pretty good. We'll start there. Big brush. Probably, this is not the brush I want. This is the brush I want. Probably can use a pretty high opacity because I want to bring out the trees. Paint with black. And it's going to look a little weird just because I've now basically just brought up those trees and they're not as dark. But once I go back in and add contrast back in my final edit for this, it will obviously make a little bit more sense because it's going to darken those trees up naturally. So now we're getting some detail there. It's not great. It's not perfect, but thankfully that part of the image is not the most important. So I think that's looking pretty good. Let's make sure the edges here looked right. It's really easy when you're using the same photo because everything you know will align perfectly because they're just the exact same photo. I'm going to use some bigger brush strokes here. I'm going to bring the opacity down some. Just make sure I'm getting all of that in. Yeah. One thing I have to worry about is a halo right here, which I think I just added by making that brush stroke. So I'm going to undo that. And so the other details I want is I want to bring out some of the darkness in the hill here. So I'm going to deselect that mask, select another mask, find something that works for this mountainside here. And if you're unfamiliar with what I'm doing, the exposure stacking and exposure blending videos that I have will explain it. You could just watch the exposure blending video. That'll pretty much explain everything I'm talking about. If you're unfamiliar, I think this is probably a decent selection. Let's start from there. The scene's right. Yep. Okay. We're still good. I forgot to change it earlier. Sorry about that, Martin, if you're a little behind. Let's see. So I'm just going to bring out, and again, it might look a little weird because this is going to be, it's going to be a little brighter than it probably naturally should look. But once I add contrast back into the image, that area is naturally going to get darker. And really, I just want enough. That's too much. Let's bring our opacity down. I'm just making some big brush strokes here right on the hillside to just bring out some of the details. And I got to be careful here because I'm pretty sure if I paint too much, it might create a haloing effect. I really just want to affect these dark areas right here and just bring out some of the details there. And basically, this is just going to help me take this one exposure, and I'm going to show you here in Lightroom. Instead of bringing the shadows all the way up and doing this, it just gives me a little bit more control because I don't necessarily want the shadows up over here as much. And I could do a lot of this with a brush in Lightroom using range masks and stuff, but it's just a little bit easier to do in Photoshop. So I'm going to turn this mask on and off, and you're going to get an idea of just how much we brighten that part up. I think it's looking pretty good. It's going to make the image look a little bit more flat for now. But when I add contrast back in, that part will go away. I'm just looking at some details here and making sure that okay, we can definitely brighten up this section a little bit here. And then I'll probably brighten up the middle even more with like a big brush stroke here. And because we're using the same exposure, I don't have to worry about anything in terms of it blending together correctly. Turn the mask on and off. That's looking pretty good. And overall, this is pretty much all I really wanted to do. And now our image is a little bit more flat. So what I'm going to do is I guess we could, let's see. We could bring down the sky a little bit while we're still in Photoshop. Why not? So all I'm going to do here is deselect my mask, create a curves adjustment, just bring down the exposure completely. I'm going to invert the mask, Control I, or I think it's Command on a Mac. Turn that mask on and off. And I'm basically just going to paint in the sky once I get the right luminosity mask. What's interesting here, though, that I have to be wary of is that a lot of these clouds are actually not super bright. But I kind of just want to darken the sky here and leave the clouds where they are. So this is probably pretty good. Let's try this. Again, we're going to use a big brush, much higher opacity. And I'm just going to paint these bright areas right here, just to darken this up. We're in Photoshop. Makes it pretty easy. That last stroke was not good because it got some of the snow. Got to be careful there. And I think that looks pretty good. So if I turn this mask on and off, you can see what it's doing. Tiny bit of adjustment. Let's hit this spot a little bit more. I don't want this to be too bright over here because it'll be distracting to the image. And one thing I can do either in Photoshop or Lightroom is I can range masks just blue, and it'll probably hit this area pretty well. If you guys are just joining, thanks for joining. The plan was to edit together 2 exposures. And because of my novice photography skills, we're using 1 exposure, long story short. So as embarrassing that is a part of live streaming, even though I thought I checked the image, it just wasn't as sharp as I wanted it to be. But we're just blending 2 together in Photoshop, using a little bit of masking. And the next thing I want to do is I definitely want to bring some, now that I'm looking at it, I want to bring some brightness out of these snow areas. So I think that's what we're going to do next. Is it possible to build a career out of just learning Photoshop and Lightroom? I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that just do digital editing in Photoshop, but I personally think that those are tools to do something different, like to actually create art with or something like that. I don't think there's necessarily a lot of career paths for just knowing programs. To me, that's like being an engineer that knows how to use a CAD program, but you still have to do the engineering part, and the CAD thing just helps you actually make it, develop it. I hope that answers your question. Okay. What was I doing? Brightening snow. Yes. So we're going to take some of the snow from this layer. So I'm actually going to turn off this layer. It's going to make it a little easier to find the right mask. And I'm just going to look for where the snow is the brightest through these masks. Could be a little difficult. I think I'm going to select this and then add some contrast in to hopefully get those white areas a little bit brighter for my selection. Not entirely in love with this, so let's go a little bit further. And while I have this mask selected, I'm going to go to Adjustments, go to Levels, and then we're just going to try to get, basically I want the white areas to look really white, but I want the dark areas to look pretty dark. Something like this is pretty good. So now that I have that selection, I'm going to go back in here, make the selection. It's now selected it and hidden the marching ants so you can see them. Now, I'm not going to actually do this, but if I were to paint right here, it's going to brighten up that snow a lot. But I have to be careful because I know it's selecting the sky. So what I'm going to do is come in. We're going to bring our opacity down to about 35%. And I'm going to decrease my brush size. And no, even less opacity because I'm going to want to paint in some stuff. And I'm just going to come in here and paint some of this snow. And I kind of want the left side snow to be a little bit brighter than the right side snow because my source of light is technically over here. And so I'm going to create the illusion that it's hopefully adding a little bit of light to this side of the mountain. Now, I could be using my pen, but if you watch my streams before, I'm usually pretty lazy with that, and I won't break it out unless I really need it. This is a good opportunity to use it because I can control the opacity a little bit more. I'm actually going to do it instead of talking about it because it's going to make my life a little bit easier. So using a pressure sensitive pen, going to make my life a little bit easier for this edit, hopefully. So that's plugged in. And going to decrease my, I think I'm going to decrease my brush size a little bit. And just going to paint it. Now I can increase my opacity because now I have a little bit of control with the pressure of my pen. Yeah, there we go. That's feeling pretty good. And I want to have a low opacity here so that I can brush in. Because if I kept brushing in the same spot, you can see, if I keep brushing in the same spot, it will just keep adding to that particular spot. Just gives me a little bit range to be able to add some of this light in. And that's the reason I wanted to bring this into Photoshop, is you can get an idea of what we're doing here. I'm kind of painting in to make these areas of snow brighter. I'm going to turn the mask off so you can see exactly what the image looked like before. And even though the snow looks fine, it's just not, it's not popping enough. And I want it to be clear, and I want to add a little bit of dynamics to the snow, even though in the original shot, a lot of this was painted or in shadow. But thankfully, with a little bit of editing, we can change that. So as you can tell, I brightened up this section, and I'm probably going to have to come back and do this a little bit more precisely as I talk. But we're just coming through. I want to brighten up most of the snow first, and then probably come in and darken up some of the spots. I definitely know I want to brighten up this. This is going to be tough, though. Let's make sure my... Oops. Yeah. That needs to be 0. It's going to be tough, though, because, again, if I reach here, it's going to brighten up the sky. So I really got to be careful. I think what I'm going to do is just use a big brush, bring down my opacity a bit, and just gently paint in right here. Kind of where it's clear. It's a little foggy up here, so I'm not as worried about that spot. And I'm just going to paint in a little bit of brightness right there. I'm going to turn the mask on and off so you can kind of see what we're doing. It's looking pretty good. So I'm going to keep doing this. If you guys have any questions, feel free to chime in, ask questions. I haven't been very good at answering the ones that you've been asked so far in terms of knowledge, I guess. But if you have landscape photography questions that have nothing to do with taking panoramics on zoom lenses, I can help you out. Because apparently I messed those up. I'm just going to keep focusing on this. And again, if you have questions, feel free. And sorry about the lull in talking. I think I'm going to paint this part in. I'm going to brighten this up really slightly. But again, I don't want too much brightness on the edges of the image. I think that's probably pretty good. Hey, thanks, Mike. All right. I don't know what's going on there. Hopefully that goes away eventually. I am going to brighten up. So this looks a little blurry probably, but I think this was mostly just those moving waves of snow coming off the mountains. I'm trying to be careful here. I think this opacity is just too strong. Just trying to brighten up that part of the mountain, just because I know it's being hit by light. And that little edge right there. That looks pretty nice. Turn the mask on and off. It's looking a little bit too bright right here. So we're going to come back in and switch our mask back. I really want to focus on these little edges right here. So I'm going to leave these areas dark. And I'm just going to brighten these edges. So Did I use a nodal slide rail for the telephoto? No. I don't carry around. I assume that's those brackets that do panoramas, right? That look like giant L's. I don't know their official name, so if that's what it is, I don't use those. Mostly because I'm a very lightweight kit kind of person. And the fact that I have to carry a video equipment with me now makes it even harder. Oh, okay. Well then, what is it? Nodal slide rail. I don't know what that is. But anyways, I only take 2 lenses with me, and I will probably shoot landscape photography for the rest of my life if I can get away with it with only 2 lenses. That's just how I shoot. I try to carry the least amount possible so that I feel like I can go further in specific areas. I don't carry very much on me. If we're just talking photography kit, it's literally my camera, a tripod, and 2 lenses. And that's all I really want to bring. Sometimes some filters. So right now I'm paying attention. This bright spot right here has caught my attention, and I'm kind of accentuating that a little bit while I'm answering your questions. It's a tiny rail. Yes, Ivor, this was on the R5. If you watch my recent video, you see me take these shots in the video at the end. Nah, Andrew, I think you can get away with 2, but that's just my opinion. Usually if I want a range between 35 and 70, which is the range I don't cover, if I absolutely want something between those, I can either shoot at 70 and take 2 shots and stitch them together, or I can take 2 shots at 35 and stitch them together. I know that sounds weird, but if I've ever felt like I wanted like 50 mil, just taking 2 shots at 70 has worked. That's just been my experience though. But the majority of the time, that particular range for me, I don't need as much. Mike, I will look it up later, but I did not use one. Yeah, that's pretty much my kit minus the 24-70. I have never felt the need to carry around the 24-70. And what's funny is I watch a lot of photographers that do carry around a 24-70. Like I know Thomas Heaton, before he got his GFX 100, was carrying around one. And he said he used it a lot. But something I paid attention to in a lot of his videos is that the majority of his photos either come out at below 35 or close to 70 or above, which I think is really interesting. That if you go back and look at all your images and see what focal length they were taken at, a lot of the times you can realize what you really need. And again, you have the ability at 70 millimeters to take 2 shots, like a stitch from top to bottom or left to right, and you can pretty much cover that 50 mil range. Yeah, I'm not a prime guy. That is for sure. But that's mostly because prime lenses excel at, really wide apertures, which I'm not ever really shooting at most of the time. So again, just painting in some of these bright areas while I answer some questions. We're just getting this. Let's bring the opacity up because I kind of want to have a little bit more effect here. Just painting in these nice little bright areas here. This is looking pretty nice. If I turn this mask on and off, you can see those bright spots that I've affected. And if you're just joining, welcome. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a good Wednesday. I try to stream. That's too strong. I try to stream every Wednesday, possibly every other Wednesday. I haven't necessarily decided, just because Wednesday is a great day to go shoot. And if I stream, I can't go shoot sunset, but I could shoot sunrise. Okay, so let's make our brush a little bit. Yeah, this is looking good. That might be too strong. I think that was too strong. So if we turn our mask on and off, we can see how much we've highlighted just that little bit there. Looking pretty good. Yeah, if you shoot a lot of astro, obviously, primes are great. I have the 14 mil Rokinon 2.8, but I don't shoot enough astro to justify spending a lot of money on lenses for it. But I think something like that is fantastic. It's like $280, great image quality for what you get, and does specifically Astro really well. All right, starting to pay attention to all the little details here. Let's darken this spot just a little bit. Let's brighten this spot just a little bit. Let's darken this spot a little bit. And I'm paying attention to how the snow is falling. So it looks like there's a little ridge here, and that the light here would catch a little bit more than the light here. And that's kind of what I'm paying attention to right now. And we're just going through, so like this spot should be a little bit darker. This spot should be a little bit brighter. And we're just kind of painting in some light here to kind of give contrast into the snow that wasn't originally there. That's pretty much what I'm doing right now. It's doing a really good job. Thankfully with snow, it's usually easy to get a good mask going, and makes it a little bit easier to actually work with, which is nice. So like, for example, this part should obviously be dark, and then maybe this part down, this part down here should be a tad brighter since it's actually able to get hit by the light. That might have been too strong. Okay. So just darkening. Let's see, how does that get affected? So it should be darker up here, a little bit brighter down here, I'm assuming. So we can just gently, like I said, this is the best part about the pen. So I can select the stuff really easily. Definitely want to brighten up some of these spots. And again, I've pretty much brightened up all the snow, but then I've gone back and adjusted it so that it's adding a little bit more contrast on the hill. Do I think the R1 specs... Oh, the R1 is the 1DX version, right? I have no idea. I will say what I think Canon has done they've decided to sacrifice a little bit of their limitations in terms of, like before they were always behind in specs on a spec sheet, quote unquote. And I think what they've decided to do is just let themselves, like they have allowed their camera to potentially overheat, which I don't think they ever did before. And that is something that they've decided to just forego so that their specs look better. Because for example, Sony's used to overheat. They definitely had problems overheating in their early iterations, but their specs were so good that people just kept talking about them. And I think that Canon has just let go of that, even though I really don't think it's that big of a concern. I mean, I'm not shooting 8K ever, so, but I'm not really a fanboy of anything. I do shoot Canon, but I think a lot of the times the reasons I shoot Canon are just because I'm too lazy to sell all my stuff and buy something else that I don't really see a huge benefit in doing. Like I said, I was considering the GFX 100S, but because there's not a wide zoom for it, I didn't want to move to that system yet, and I couldn't necessarily justify the cost for that move because I didn't necessarily think it was going to change. It was going to make my photography all that much better, but I did consider it. And then the other thing is, like if I were to switch to Sony, between the R5 and the A7R IV, there's not a huge difference. So I just didn't care to move towards it. And I've always liked the form factor of like a Nikon or a Canon a little bit better than the Sony or the Fuji. I like the Fuji dials and stuff like that, but actually holding it in my hand and the way the buttons are laid out just feels a little bit better on a Canon or a Nikon. But like I said, I'll just use whatever. I don't really care. I've just stuck with Canon because those are the lenses I have. What I'm used to. And there have been points in photography related gear stuff that there are monumental increases between brand to brand, but I wasn't at a point where I wanted to change my camera at the time. And when I got to that point, I guess, which was now, they're all pretty close. Mike, for me, it's the type of thing where if it was, we're going to include 8K or not include 8K, and the holding back part was the overheating thing. I mean, I'm the type of person that would say include it because it's possible, but warn your customers that it might overheat. And again, I think that goes opposite of their philosophy before that. I think they've definitely changed to try to compete, because a lot of people, in my opinion, focus way too much. I mean, I just talked about this, but a lot of people focus way too much on specs, and I really don't think it's all that important. I mean, I just bought a camera that's 4 years newer, and I really don't think the image quality between my two images are going to change all that much. But again, I don't shoot high FPS stuff. I don't shoot stuff that requires eye tracking and stuff like that. So maybe that's why I'm a little biased there. For me, whatever makes my life easier is what I care about. So I think you just shoot with whatever makes you happy. And at the end of the day, the images you're going to get are probably going to be great based off of your skill as a photographer, more so than the camera. That's what it all comes down for me. I still see photos posted that are from like 10 years old cameras that are fantastic photos. So, okay. I think we've got this snow looking pretty good. Now you can tell what I've done. It's a little bit brighter through this area, a little bit brighter through here. It might be a little too bright here, actually. So what I'm going to come in and do is paint with whites, super low opacity so that I can paint it in a little bit. And I'm just going to darken up this spot a touch. I think that's probably pretty good. Yeah. Kind of looking around the image. This should definitely be dark. This should be dark, and it brightens up right here. That's looking pretty good. I think this spot should be brighter, though. So let's try to work on that really quick. Let's go back up here. Also, I know that I can hold... Is it Shift Alt? No. What are the two buttons? That's not it. There's two buttons where I can adjust my... Oh boy. I always forget this shortcut. How do I get rid of that point? Oh boy. Is it this? There are two... Oh my god. Okay, I'm going to give up. The button to hold down where you can just drag your brush and it changes the brush size. Oh, it's right click. That's why I always forget it, because I don't have right click set on my pen. I knew it. I'm like, I just don't use it enough. That's why you keep seeing me go up top to change the opacity over and over again, is because I don't have I think right click is set to, let's see, is it this button? Nope, that switched my colors. Nope. I don't think I have right click set on my pen, so I don't use it enough. So if you see me continually going up here to change opacity, you can technically hold Alt and right click, and then like if I do it on my mouse really quick, you can use your mouse to go up and down and change the hardness, the size of the brush, which is super helpful. But I've just gotten in such a habit of just changing my opacity up here. And again, I think if I used my pen more, which maybe I might in the future, it's something I should use more often just to make my own life easier. And I guess it's out of stubbornness that I just haven't, really gotten to it. Okay, I got to bring this down. This is too much. Got to be extra careful here so that I don't hit the clouds too much. But I want this whole area to be a little bit brighter. That's probably too much right there. That's probably too much overall, so just going to... I think that looks pretty good. Yeah. When I used the pen more, I used it a lot, but that was on an older computer where I had the button set for right click. And like I said, I just haven't gotten around to... Realistically, if I was like, I guess less lazy or less stubborn, I would just use the pen for all Photoshop work and just force myself to get better with it. But I really only break it out when I have to do stuff that requires pressure sensitivity. I think this is looking pretty good. I think overall we're close to done here in Photoshop. So if I turn this on and off, this is what we started with. This is our mask to bring out the snow a little bit. It still might be a tad too bright right here. No, I think it's fine. If I end up noticing it's too bright once I take it into Lightroom, I will do something about it. Overall, I think this is good to take it back into Lightroom. So I'm going to save. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. It'll take a second to save. Saving to an external drive. Not that I think that really slows it down too much, but hope everyone's doing well. There might be some stuff I take back, like I go back into Photoshop and do, because sometimes I don't, especially when I'm live streaming, I'm not fully focused on what else the image needs. Like right now I'm looking at it and trying to decide, is there anything else in Photoshop that I should do? And for now, I think it's fine, but we can always go back in if I decide against it. Oops, sorry, I bumped the mic there. Well, that's good to know, Ricardo. I don't usually adjust hardness of the brush very often. The only time the times I make it harder when I'm doing like non-photo editing, usually 0% is pretty great. I guess sometimes if I'm using it to, you know, get really intricate on a line, I'll increase the hardness, but it's pretty rare. All right. Now that we're back in here, let's add some contrast. And what I'm going to do, like I said before, and I could have done this in Photoshop if I wanted to, but I kind of like the effect of using a radial filter here, is I'm going to not only brighten up the middle of the image a little bit, I'm also going to warm it up. And I think that's going to create a nice effect here on the mountainside. So I'm going to brighten it up ever so slightly. Well, maybe I want to, well, now that I brighten up the snow, I got to be extra careful here. So maybe not that much. Bring up the whites a little bit. Then bring contrast back in. Okay, this is definitely too bright. So let's do exposure. Bring down the whites back because it's hitting the snow a little bit too much. And just kind of playing here. And then I'm just going to really warm up the center here. So what that's doing is I really like the colors in the sky a lot. So if I were to just completely adjust the white balance of the whole image, it's going to change a lot of that, and I don't want that. And by using the radial filter here, and again, I could have done this in Photoshop by changing the color balance and then blending it in. I really like having a radial filter right on the center here. I guess I accidentally, did I delete this on accident? Yeah. And just warming up the center of the image. And I probably need to do it a little bit less. I might need to do 2 radial filters so that I have more adjustment here, because I might want to warm up and brighten 2 different spots. Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the warmness out of this radial filter because I think I want less feather for it. So let's add some dehaze. That's going to really add some nice tonal contrast in the sky, but we have to be careful because it's going to blue up the image a little bit. Blue up. I mean, make the image more blue. I don't want to confuse what I'm trying to say there. But I can always adjust that in the HSL. We're also going to have to come in here, and because I added that contrast back in, and depending on if I was posting this online or for print, the reason I'm creating this GND, even though we blended in these trees, and then they ended up darkening back up like I predicted or said I was going to happen, I want to have this graduated filter. And I'm going to use a range mask here, select the trees to get us a good idea. I'm going to hold Alt while I'm selecting that. And I don't want the snow as much, and I don't want these rocks as much. So about right here is probably pretty good. I'm just going to bring up the shadows a little bit. Now the benefit of having this graduated filter here is that let's say I come in and I want to print this image. I know that I'm going to have to manipulate these trees a little bit more than the rest of the image to get the details out of them that I want. So best way to do that is I'm just going to bring up the shadows a little bit, and then I'm going to bring up the dehaze, which is going to darken them back, but it's going to remove that fuzziness in the image because I'm bringing up those shadows. And so now you can see if I turn this on and off, you can see it just brightened them up ever so slightly, but not so much that they're distracting. I still want them to be dark, but I want some amount of detail there so you can tell that they're trees. 𝐒𝐨𝐜𝐢𝐚, the Italy one, right? I think I did 2 versions of it. By finish, finish is always a tough word for me in terms of photos. I have not posted it. I did post it to Instagram, but it has not entered my portfolio yet. That is an image I still want to go back with fresh eyes and make sure that it's where it needs to be. But I do remember what you're talking about. But I have not gone back to look at it again with better eyes. So now that we've done that, we're going to create another radial filter. So this is brightening up the center of the image ever so slightly. I'm going to create another one that's less in the sky and more just in the foreground. Now technically I could use a G&D here, but I don't want the hard line that's there. And then I'm going to make sure that the feather isn't great. And then we're going to warm up the center of the image. And I think it's going to create a really nice effect. Because again, I like having some blue in the snow, but I don't want it to look... because right now the snow is so blue, it looks like it's in shadow, even though I brightened it up. But by just warming up the snow a little bit, it's going to bring out more character. It's going to really match the light that's over here. And the reason I'm using this radial filter is you can kind of tell that it's a little bit more blue over here on the edge, and it's a little bit more blue over here on the edge, which is great because I want my viewer's eye to go to the center of the image, right where the mountain is. And I think this is doing a really good job. So if I delete this, I really think that warming up the center of the image does a really good job at just making the mountain pop just a little bit more, but it doesn't affect those colors in the sky like we're trying to prevent. And so I'm going to leave just this filter as my warming filter. And I'm going to go back to my other one. And I think what I'm going to do is add a little bit more dehaze to bring some contrast back into the hill there, the mountain. And I think that's looking pretty good. So something else I did on my original edit is I believe I 2x1 panoed this. And that's because, and I'm not sure if I'm set on that yet, but I really don't like this blue up here. It's okay. I think overall, if I didn't crop this right now, it's fine. But I genuinely think that this area is just a little bit too bright for the image. So I could do 2 things. I could come in here, I could create a graduated filter, and we could bring down the highlights a decent amount and the exposure not that much. And I can range mask this to the color that the sky is, so it affects this cloud a little bit less. And I can check by holding Alt on the amount to see what it's actually affecting. And then I could technically tone that down a little bit. I don't want to push it, but it's still bright enough that I don't really want it in my image. So something else I could do is I could stretch it out in Photoshop. But I think realistically what I'm going to do is get rid of this. And I think my final crop will probably be something like this. Something along these lines. Let's balance it a little bit more. But I'm not entirely sold on it yet. But I think this is probably close to where I'll have it, just depending on the crop that I end up wanting. Okay. I'm just going to time this guy out, I guess. Hopefully that worked. So let's zoom. I think this is close to 100. I think this is looking pretty good. Maybe it's still, you can definitely see there's discoloration, blue tone here and warm tone here. So I need to go back, and I think what I'm going to do, I think I'm just going to bring it out some more. So what I'm going to do is zoom out of the image and just bring it out a little bit more. I think that's probably a little bit better. I think overall this is looking pretty strong. So like I said, this was the edit. Let me bring up the edit I did only in Lightroom. I think this was it. And you could tell, so the things that I didn't like about it that I really wanted, it was a little bit more detail in the trees and a little bit more detail on the mountain face here where the snow was not so dull. And if we check our edit now from Photoshop to here, I think we've done a really, we've done a really good job at brightening some of that part of the snow. I do think we can add a little bit more contrast in the image. I'm going to bring up my whites a little bit. I'm going to bring my blacks down a little bit. But again, remember the blacks are really going to affect those trees down there. So I'm actually, instead of bringing the blacks down of the whole image, I'm actually going to come into our adjustment here and bring the blacks down here. So that's going to have more of an effect on the mountain to add some contrast back into there rather than the trees as much. And it's just doing the job that I want, which is adding contrast to those hills, peaks rather. I just use iCloud, Mike. So details looking pretty good. Now let's see, how do I want to handle clarity here? So normally I want to see what the effect a slider is doing. I just drag it to an extreme and see how it's affecting the image. So I actually think for clarity, normally I've been doing like -5 or -10. I particularly think on this image, what I'm going to do is come in here and add clarity to the center of the image by about 13. And then I'm going to actually remove clarity in the whole image by about 7. So that nets about 6 in the center of the image, +6. But then in the clouds up here, you've got that really nice tonality and softness that I'm going for there. Let's see, maybe some texture would do well here, but not too much. I don't want it to look grungy. We haven't added sharpness in yet, which I think I'll do now. And I think that's really going to make the image be pretty much done almost. I'm trying to look at the light. I still think maybe maybe it's a little bit too bright in the middle, but I'm not entirely sure yet. I'm full screening it. I think it's looking pretty good. Snapdrop. Direct Wi-Fi transfer. Well, when I do it to iCloud, I just go to iCloud.com and drag the images in there and they show up on my phone. Is that the same thing? Yeah, I think this image is going to go in my portfolio, which is pretty rare. So that should be saying a lot. I do think that depending on the monitor, your colors are going to look a little different. I think I'm going to come down here and add a little bit of blue calibration. About 40, but then I'm going to adjust the blue saturation ever so slightly, probably about negative. I'm looking over here, by the way. I don't want this to be too blue, and I'm also looking down here. And you can see where that radial filter is affecting things. So if I come over here and look at the snow, it's looking pretty white. But if I come over here and look, it's looking pretty blue. So, and that's because I just calibrated down here to, I basically, all this is I'm really using it for is to add a little bit of like saturation back into the image. You can also notice it makes this area of the rock pop just a little bit more and adds a little bit of almost like contrast right there. But I have to be careful that these sides don't look discolored. So I'm going to remove some of the blue in the image, and I will have to come back with fresh eyes on this. Usually anytime I'm doing anything portfolio worthy, I mean pretty much all my images, I have to come back with fresh eyes. In this particular case, because the colors are so important, I will have to check that as well. I'm actually going to come in here, look at our color adjustment or our temperature adjustment, and I think I'm just going to keep spreading it out just a little bit because I think it's still too strong. And then I'm going to bring the feather down some. And again, I'm looking over here on the edges. I really just don't want to affect the sky that much is the most important thing. So I'm going to press O to see the overlay. I'm not worried too much right here. It is affecting this spot right here pretty heavily though. So that is not what I want. Maybe there's a better way to do this to get a little bit more precision. because I really like the way it warms everything up. I'm kind of just dragging this around to see how it affects the image. But I don't like how it warms up the sky. Because what happens when I warm up the sky is it accentuates this color, but it gets rid of all of those nice blues and pinks. And I don't really want that. So, honestly, I should probably do this in Photoshop. Because I basically want everything below the sky to be warmer. So that might be something I have to do later, because that is going to take some time. I just don't like what's happening over here. If I could get away with doing just a radial filter, I would. But I don't think. So if I moved it down here. I think this is probably pretty close. But it's still blue over here. I'll have to, I think, again, this comes back to, you know, if this is going in my portfolio, I want it to be as best as possible. So what I will likely do is come in here and basically all I really need to do is before this curves adjustment, let's see. I think I'm just going to copy this layer. Nope. Deselect my mask, copy this layer, get rid of the mask that's there. Come in here to filter, camera raw filter. We're just going to do it right now. Oh, okay. It is strange to me that people sit on YouTube just going into live chats and doing this kind of stuff. It's amusing. Mostly just because I wish I had that much free time. I'm a little jealous. Hey, Malcolm. Thanks for joining. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just trying to remove all these messages. I don't know why they didn't get auto-modded. Mike, I will check it out. The program you said. Yeah, I don't know why the bot didn't get that stuff. And sadly, it stays on the screen. Kind of ruins things for people that watch later. Apologies, guys, if you see that. Does not. I'm going to refresh the chat box really quick. I don't know how do I refresh it? Will that do it? There we go. All right. Good to go. Back to editing. Okay, so we open up Camera Raw, and basically I duplicated that layer, open up Camera Raw, and I think I'm just going to increase the temp. And I have to be careful here because I think it was what, 30? Close? Yeah, this looks pretty good. And then all I'm going to do is create a mask here, and then I just want to basically mask in the brightest parts of the image. Hopefully this isn't too hard. Okay. This might be a little difficult. So I think the easiest way to do this is probably select this mask and then see if I can go into layers, adjustments, levels, and I'm going to try to separate the mountain as best as possible from the sky. It's not going to be perfect. Good news is it doesn't necessarily have to be pristine. I can have some difference here. Let's turn this layer on. Fill with black. 100% opacity. And we're going to paint in sky. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect because that little warming section works out. And we brought all of that color back into the sky. And that looks pretty good. Let's turn this layer on and off. We're keeping the colors there. Perfect. Maybe there's just a little bit here left. And I don't mind if some of the blue is in this area because it would be reflecting that blue in the sky. I'm okay with that. Let's make sure there's not a halo happening. So I'm actually going to deselect my mask because I think we did a pretty good job of that selection. And make sure that there's no halo happening right there. Turn that mask on and off. You can see it's definitely hitting this snow right here. So need to come back in. Oops. And I'm going to bring my opacity down a little bit. I'm going to go through the top's edges here because the snow is really important. That's kind of what I wanted to warm up the most in these sections. So I'm just turn this mask on and off. Okay. And then I'm going to fight with it on the edge here a little bit. And I just have to be careful so that I'm not creating a halo. I don't think we are. I think we're okay. Let's check over here. Looks like there might be a spot. And I think that's, let's see. Let's bring this back down. I do want this to be somewhat warm. This spot could be a little warmer. All right. I think that's looking pretty good. That was a quick fix. Okay. Now what's cool is I could technically open up Camera Raw again on this particular image and cool it off, warm it up again. Let's make sure. Nope, it looks a little bit blue right here, I think. Let's turn the mask off. Yeah, tiny bit blue. That's not the right layer. Just making sure. The good news is because it's so warm near the mountain, it wasn't that hard to blend together. Like if I turn this mask on and off, this area doesn't change in much color by warming it up. Not by very much, but this area up here definitely does. And I think overall that looks pretty good, so I'm going to save. Go back into Lightroom. Probably remove that. Obviously, we're going to remove that radial filter that was doing the warming. And then we should be close to done. Although, maybe I want it a little bit cooler over here. I might cool it off right here now that it's saving. Let's cancel that. So I'm going to cool it off ever so slightly here. I'm going to have a super low opacity, like 2%. And then I'm going to use a mask here. Doesn't have to be super precise. And I just want to cool off. So I'm going to paint black right here. Because this stuff is in shadow, so it should be a little bit... Okay, I guess we can bring our opacity up a little bit more than that. It should be a little cooler right here, naturally. But not too much. And then can cool it here. That wasn't a huge change, but I think that'll help a little bit. Cool it more here, more down here. Okay, now we can save. Hope you guys are doing well. The chat is back, by the way. Here, let me test it. Make sure it's correct on stream. Hopefully that shows up. I'm going to let this save, get it reloaded in. Okay, good. Showed up. Sorry about... I don't know why the bot didn't catch that. It catches all kinds of stuff that it shouldn't catch, and then it didn't catch that. That was super annoying. If you guys are just joining, thank you. Really appreciate the support. All right. It is saved. We can now come back in here to our edit. Make sure that we reload all of our edits. And then obviously it's going to look bad because of that. So we're just going to delete that. Why is it so much darker? Did I... What the heck? Well, now I'm confused. Huh. That's interesting. Don't think it darkened that much between these two exposures. But the whole image looks darker now. Maybe my eyes are deceiving me. Oh, it definitely looks darker. Oh, of course, Debbie. Okay. I don't know why it looks that much darker. Just because I adjusted the... Huh. I am a little perplexed here. It should not have darkened the image. Oh, well, I guess it did darken a lot down here. Okay. So what I'm going to do, actually, let's go back into Camera Raw here and just brighten it up a little bit. Because I guess warming it up, warming it up removed all the brightness out of the image. Maybe I should have caught that. I did not. So I'm just going to brighten it up by a little bit. Don't want to bring the shadows up too much because I can do that. Oh, you know what's happening? I'm dumb. No. Is it not bringing in? Oh, I know what's happening. Okay. I'm pretty sure it's not using the tree layer now. That is what's happening. That makes sense. Because it is only bringing through the top part of the image. So all I need to do is... Technically, there's got to be a better way to do that, but... Okay. Because this image is only using the sky. Sorry, I am having a brain fart, trying to figure out how to have these two blended together. I think I'm just going to do this. Maybe it was right, and I just don't understand why it's darkening. Oh, I know what I was supposed to do. Okay. I want to warm up this layer, which is these two layers combined. That's what it is. Sorry, guys. I had to figure that out in my head. I want to warm up the layer that has the two layers combined, because if I don't do that, then the trees are just going to be darker, because it's not taking into account all those blend that we did before. That's what's happening. So I have warmed up this layer. It is now the same as this layer, except the correct one. I'm just going to drag this mask here and delete this. And now we have our warmer layer. Perfect. With the brighter snow, the brighter trees, everything like that. And I can group these two together and say original layers. And I can name this. Now, if I was smart and knew that I was going to want to warm up one of these photos, I would have brought an extra layer in when I originally brought them into Photoshop and did it that way. But because we didn't decide to do this until later, kind of just bandaging the photo and doing it this way. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now as this saves. Hope everyone is doing well. Thank you for being patient. There was definitely a slight brain fart there when I was trying to realize why the trees and the snow lost all of the edit we just did. And it was because I copied or I duplicated our original photo, which is this. And if I turn off the mask, so I duplicated this layer and warmed it up. That means that all of that blending we did for the layer that was below it, which is this and the snow, didn't carry over. So now when I go back into Lightroom, this should look correct. It does. Okay. Perfect. This still looks a little bit too blue. So I'm going to warm up the whole image. Not that much. So now what I can do is I can still do that radial filter in the middle to warm up the middle of the image, but I only really need to do it by about like 5 or 6. Not very much. Yeah, there we go. And now there'll be much less harsh tonality shifts on the edges of the screen. Let's actually bring this down to get out of the sky some. Definitely still looking a little too blue. Might be because of this though. Yeah, it is. Okay. This is almost done, I think. Just balancing some colors. I do think that I will have to come back to this with fresh eyes, just because that's typically how photography is. And I think overall it's looking pretty good. I think one thing I don't like is that this face here is a tiny bit brighter than this face. And I think that's probably happening because of the way this filter is right on here. Not this one, this one. So maybe I want to bring the shadows up ever so slightly. Nope. I think I'll just have to come back to that. I think this photo is almost done. Let's check the corners. I think it's pretty close. I think we can actually warm up the whole thing by a tiny bit. How does that look on the stream? Yeah. Pretty good. Maybe 0.2 or 2 instead. Okay. I think that is pretty much our edit. Here it is full screen. You guys won't be able to see the right hand side. But that is pretty much the finalized edit. I might do a few adjustments here. Like I said, I do think I want this spot a little bit darker. So let's just do that really quick with another radial filter. It doesn't have to be super precise. I'm just going to bring down the shadows. Maybe the exposure just a little bit. And then the shadows. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So all that did was just darken that face a little bit, get your eyes a little bit more on the main peaks here. And again, I think the focus on this image is those colors on the peak, on the mountain. I think this is Long's Peak, pretty sure, like 99% sure. And I think overall, image is done. Hey, thanks, Martin. Again, sorry about the slight brain fart there with the why I couldn't figure out why the image got so much darker until I realized that the warming layer we picked was incorrect, and I needed to stamp the edit that we did. Technically, that was destructive editing because we had to use these two layers, and now I can't go back and adjust these two if I needed to. But the only reason I had to do that was because I used the camera raw filter. Technically, what I could have done here is instead of using a new stamped layer and using camera raw, I could have come in here and added a color balance color balance adjustment. The thing is, I just don't like this. I get a little bit more, I guess, precision or understanding out of actually using the camera raw filter to adjust temperature, and it just has a different effect. So that's the reason I chose to stamp the image and use camera raw filter. And that's pretty much it. Don't think there's any other photos I'm going to work on. We're about to hit, we've been going for an hour and 45 minutes. So if you have any questions, any comments, suggestions, feel free to talk about them now. And yeah, we'll hang out for a bit and go from there. I might play around with the image a little bit more while I wait. But thank you for joining the stream. Hope you guys learned something. And you got to see me struggle through some stuff there. Fun times. Yeah, I'm going to hang out for a little bit. If there's no questions or anything, I will likely just end the stream here. Hey, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. I do think as I'm looking at this more that maybe still that this little patch of snow right here is too bright. But those are the little changes that make editing so difficult. Is that a rock? Yeah. Because every time I look at it, I'm like, oh, maybe I should change this. Maybe I should change this. Sometimes it's just good to export it and put it online and then just move on. Simon, I'll be completely honest and say I am no print expert. But normally increasing by about 0.4 to 0.5 of a stop. So bringing the exposure up to like this. And it all depends on the paper. It all depends on the ink. I know that's not a great answer. I'm actually in the process right now of working with a local printer on a bunch of different styles of prints, a bunch of different mediums of prints. Hopefully they get back to me soon. They're supposed to be printing like 4 or 5 of my photos on different papers and stuff like that so we can figure out what it looks best on. And I'll be completely honest and say I have a printer, but I really only print on one like luster style paper. And if I was printing for sales, which is the process I'm going through now, I'm going to work with somebody that knows printing a lot better than I do, because I will admit it's not something I'm like super knowledgeable on. And what I mean by that is if I have a photo like this, I can't necessarily tell you, oh, this particular photo will look best on this particular paper and style. And that's kind of why, I mean, that's technically why print shops and stuff exist, is because usually they have much better knowledge on, okay, these tones and the way this image looks will look better on this style of paper and this style of ink. And in terms of adjusting it for print, honestly, the best way is just, if you do have a printer, increase the exposure by a little bit, bring the shadows up by like 15 maybe print it and see how it looks. And just remember that the lighting in the room, like if you're in a dark room, it's just going to look dark. If you're in a room that gets light, it should look brighter. And that's just kind of how the challenge of doing print work is. I hope that answers your question. In terms of sharpening, that one I don't know very well. I know exposure, and I know that they're sharpening for screen and they're sharpening for print. But again, that always just comes down to the printer you're printing on. I do know that you probably want to sharpen less for print because, well, depending on the size. So if you're printing small, you're scaling down the image, it might look over sharpened. But if you're printing larger, you might want to leave that amount of sharpening because you're increasing the size. I know that was the worst answer possible, but it's the honest answer. And the truth is I really don't know all the answers for that kind of stuff. I haven't done enough print work personally, and I'm in the process of learning. So hey, Roberto, I don't know when you joined, but you're at the very tail end of the stream. But thank you for hopping in. Hey, life can be busy sometimes, man. No worries. Simon, to finalize the answer, if you don't have someone you can go to locally that's like a print shop to talk to, which I didn't before, you can always order prints through an online service and then call them and say, hey, help me out. What would this look best on? What do I need to do sharpening wise and stuff like that? Usually they'll be able to help you. And I will even be able to help you soon once I learn a lot of the answers to those questions, because I have the same questions. But like I said, it really just depends on the photo. It depends on how big you're printing, paper, everything like that. Oh, okay. Are they helping you with the answers to those questions? Because realistically, I think the answers really come down to like what it's being printed on and stuff, right? Like I don't think there's a general rule of thumb for choosing those, how much you need to brighten it and how much sharpening you need to either remove or add. Hey, Colin, how's it going? You're just catching the tail end of the stream. Oh, by the way, for anyone that's still here, I thought I would bring this up. I have added, not that I haven't offered it this whole time, but if you ever want a one-on-one session, whether it's dealing with editing, your portfolio, your website, because I do have web design background, anything like that, I added this to my website. You can contact me, ask questions about what you want to do. And this is on there. I just charge by the hour. If you ever wanted just a one-on-one session, personal, anything like that, I do offer that officially now. Not that I didn't offer it before, but I added this little thing in the store, which you can find, has all the details, and anything like that. I mean, it pretty much would be very similar to these live streams, except working with your photos, talking about your photos, what you want to do with your photos, could be in the field stuff, anything of that nature. If you have interest in that, feel free to send me a message, and we can connect and figure out if that's what you want. Hey, John. Thanks for joining. You just joined the tail end of the stream. We're just chatting for a little bit until I hit the end stream button. And yeah. So if you have any questions while you just join, feel free. I'm going to give it a minute or two more. If no one else has any questions or anything, I'll probably end the stream here. I really appreciate you guys joining, hanging out. Yeah, I have a print on metal in my living room. Metal is a pretty big landscape. Oh, you probably know that. But yeah, I print on metal a decent amount of time, mostly just because two things about printing on metal is it seems like, one, it's a lot easier to hang. You don't have to get it framed, which can be very expensive. You don't necessarily have to worry about glass in front of the picture. And it comes pretty much ready to put on a wall. And I think that's really cool. Also, it tends to be a very vibrant medium. So you can, a lot of landscapes that I take, for example, I mean, just look at this thing, can be very vibrant and it really makes those colors pop. Never print on glass. I think you're probably referring to acrylic, and usually acrylic prints are just normal prints that have acrylic in front of them, to my knowledge. Oh, excuse me. If you heard that, sorry. That's the downside of drinking something carbonated while doing this. All right, guys. I hope everyone has a good day. I hope you learned something from the stream, just hanging out. And I appreciate all support. Thank you for tuning in. And I hope that the photo that I stumbled through made sense. So thanks, guys. I will see you again. I think I'll probably have a stream next week. Not entirely sure. I'll schedule it regardless. If I do, I will absolutely. Well, I don't want to say absolutely, but I'll always try to have a stream at least every other week. Yeah, I think so, Simon. I have a friend of mine has a metal print in their bathroom that they've had for years. I don't think it should be an issue. I mean, I assume it's better than a paper print in high humidity, right? So if you're in a shower or bath and there's a lot of humidity coming from the hot air or whatever, I have a feeling that probably affects a paper print more than a metal one. I mean, don't quote me on it, but I think it would be perfectly fine. They make metal prints that are for outdoors as well, so I can't imagine it would have a huge, you'd have to worry about it too much. Anyways, thanks, everyone. I will see you again very soon. Thanks for the support. Thanks for tuning in.